The worst kind of power is the kind that forgets it's borrowed. Let us know in the comment section below, have you ever witnessed someone being misjudged before the truth came out? Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside. The words weren't shouted, no aggression in the tone, but something about how Officer Brad Kerrigan said it made every eye in the gate terminal shift toward the man in the tailored navy coat and pressed khakis. Brad liked using that tone. It was calm, almost rehearsed, like he was already 2 moves ahead in a game no one else knew they were playing. Brad wasn't new to airport security. He'd done his time in patrol, moved up through the sheriff's department in Glendale, bounced around a few precincts, and finally found a place where he could make the rules feel like his rules. TSA liaison, special security consultant. His badge said one thing, but his posture always said another. He was the authority, and you'd better believe it. The man he was flagging didn't flinch, just raised an eyebrow and slowly turned toward him. He wasn't young, maybe mid-40s, lean but built like someone who still trained every morning. His face was clean-shaven, jaw firm, but his eyes were the kind Brad didn't like. Calm, observant, unreadable. The kind of eyes that didn't blink when challenged. "I'm sorry, was there a problem?" the man asked, his voice even, tone deliberate. Brad stepped in a little closer, not too close, just enough to test his space. "You stepped into the pre-check lane without proper ID." The man didn't look rattled. He reached calmly into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal a driver's license and a familiar blue military ID card. Then, without a word, he extended his phone, screen already displaying a digital boarding pass, clearly labeled Liberty Skyways Flight 288, First Class, Gate B, 17. D. Rourke. Brad took the phone. He looked at the name. Daniel Rourke. "Liberty Skyways?" Brad muttered. "That's the new one. Based out of Denver, right? Real fancy startup." Daniel nodded once. "That's correct. And what exactly do you do for them?" "I'm a passenger," Daniel replied. There was no smirk, no sarcasm, just the kind of answer that should have ended the conversation. But it didn't. Brad didn't know why this guy was rubbing him the wrong way. Maybe it was the posture. Too relaxed, too sure. Maybe it was the way he didn't jump or fumble or over-explain like most people did when confronted by a badge. Or maybe it was because Brad had seen too many like him. Guys who looked like they had connections, money, clout, and still walked around like they'd earned it. "I'm going to need you to step over to the side for a secondary bag check," Brad said. "Standard procedure." Daniel studied him for half a second, then calmly walked toward the inspection table. Not a protest, not even a sigh. But other passengers were watching now. One woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "He didn't even do anything." The husband shook his head. Maybe they flagged something on his name? The murmurs had started. Brad tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the bag. Perfectly packed, leather handles, probably custom. He unzipped it slowly, as if expecting something to jump out. Clothes, a laptop, toiletries in TSA-approved bags, a dog tag peeking out from a small inner pouch. Brad's eyes hovered over it for a second too long. "You served?" he asked, not because he didn't already know, but because he wanted to hear how the man would answer. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Iraq? Twice? Army?" Brad nodded once. He'd never been in, not even ROTC, but he'd worked around enough ex-military to know they could be either allies or problems. And the ones who didn't talk much? They were the kind you watched. "You're not carrying any weapons?" Brad asked next. "No. You sure about that?" Daniel tilted his head, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Yes?" Brad gave him a long look before finally closing the bag. "You can go." Daniel took the bag, nodded once, and turned without another word. As he walked away, Brad noticed how quiet the gate had gotten. Even the kid with the iPad had stopped playing his game. All eyes were on the man who hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't said a single thing wrong, and still had to prove something just to board a flight. Brad didn't say anything else, but inside something twisted. It wasn't over. Not for him. Maya Rourke had watched the whole thing from 20 feet away. She was 16, lanky, with long curly hair tucked into a hoodie, earbuds slung around her neck, and her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She was Daniel's daughter, and she had learned long ago that when her father was disrespected, he didn't need to explode. He just needed the truth to come out. And it always did. "Dad," she said, stepping beside him as they moved toward the gate. "And fine," he answered before she could say more. But she saw the flicker of something behind his eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, something else. That quiet kind of tension he never wore in uniform, but sometimes brought home when he thought no one was looking. Back at the gate, Officer Kerrigan stood stiff, his hand hovering near his radio for no reason, watching. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the man he'd just tried to humiliate was the founder of the airline they were boarding. The man who had turned years of silence, pain, and purpose into something that carried thousands of people a day. The man who'd walked through fire so others could fly. And he sure didn't know what was coming. Not yet. But the plane hadn't even left the ground. Daniel Rourke didn't say a word as he stepped into the first-class cabin. He gave a slight nod to the flight attendant at the door, who greeted him with a rehearsed smile that faded the moment she saw Maya trailing behind him, hoodie up and eyes down. "Sir, I believe your daughter may be booked in, coach?" she asked, her tone neutral but clipped. Daniel handed her both boarding passes, already anticipating the moment. The woman blinked as she read them, her smile returning stiffly. "Of course, seats 1A and 1B. Welcome aboard, Mr. Rourke." "Miss Rourke." Daniel guided Maya to their seats, wide leather thrones separated by a walnut armrest console. Maya dropped into hers and pulled her hood further down, earbuds in but not playing. Daniel took his seat beside her, placing his bag beneath his feet, and exhaled as if pushing something far heavier than air from his chest. Across the aisle, two businessmen leaned in toward each other, not bothering to hide their glances. One wore a sport coat too tight across the shoulders. The other was already halfway into his second Bloody Mary. Neither looked familiar, but Daniel had seen their type on every route from LAX to Atlanta. Voices a little too loud, jokes a little too flat, confidence inflated by altitude. "Probably upgraded last minute," one whispered. "More points," the other muttered. "Doubt it was paid cash." Daniel pretended not to hear, his eyes fixed ahead. He'd grown used to these murmurs. They had followed him ever since Liberty Skyways became more than a blueprint and an ambition. Some thought he was a mascot, a figurehead, a former soldier with a decent handshake and a few medals they could parade around. They didn't understand he'd spent 5 years sleeping in hangars, arguing with aerospace engineers, pitching to suits who dismissed him the moment they saw infantry on his resume. He didn't care about doubters. He never had. But Maya? Maya noticed everything. "Are they talking about you?" she asked, voice low. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then, after a pause, "Doesn't matter?" Maya turned away, looking out the oval window at the tarmac. "It does to me." That was the thing about his daughter. Quiet, like him, but not silent. She burned differently. She didn't wear medals or walk into meetings with blueprints and spreadsheets, but she knew what mattered. She remembered the year they'd eaten canned chili for months because he'd mortgaged everything to build a prototype. She remembered the nights he'd stare at the garage ceiling after another rejected pitch. She remembered the folded flag in his closet, the one that never came out, not even on Veterans Day. She knew what her father had given up. She'd grown up inside the sacrifices. The intercom buzzed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Liberty Skyways Flight 2728, with service from Sacramento to Phoenix. Our estimated flight time is 1 hour and 32 minutes. Please make sure your seat belts are fastened and tray tables stowed. Thank you for flying with us." The words washed over Daniel like an old hymn. He knew that script. He had written it himself. Every phrase on the intercom, every cue in the pre-flight safety video, every uniform on the crew, it had come from him, from that relentless drive to create something that would carry people, not just physically but emotionally. A company that honored service without tokenizing it, that employed veterans in real positions, not just security or marketing mascots. A soft clink of heels approached. The same flight attendant from earlier leaned down to Daniel with a too-wide smile. "Mr. Rourke," she said, keeping her voice low, "we've just been made aware of a small issue that occurred during boarding. TSA mentioned something about a misunderstanding." Daniel nodded politely. "It's fine. If there's anything we can do to make it right. You're already flying the plane. That's enough." She hesitated, then smiled and stepped away. Maya glanced sideways at him. "That was your chance to make a scene," she whispered. Daniel chuckled. "We don't make scenes. We make statements." Across the aisle, the two businessmen were still side-eyeing. One of them leaned forward again. "So, what do you do, exactly?" he asked, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Daniel turned to him slowly. "A little bit of everything." The man laughed. "Well, with that kind of seat, you must have done something right." Maya opened her mouth, but Daniel gently touched her arm, a silent no. "Not yet." A young woman approached from the rear of the cabin, pulling a wheeled briefcase. Mid-30s, dark blazer, reporter's notepad clipped to the side. She stopped at seat 2C, just behind Daniel. Before sitting, she gave him a double-take. Not the dismissive once-overs like the others. This look held recognition. "You're Daniel Rourke, aren't you?" Daniel turned. "Yes." "I thought so. I am Lisa Monroe. I covered the Liberty Skyways Veterans Initiative last fall in Denver. You gave a keynote at the summit." Daniel gave her a nod, eyes steady. "Good memory. I remember because you didn't speak like a CO. You spoke like someone who still missed the desert." Daniel offered a tight smile. "That's because I do." She looked like she had more to say, but respected the boundary in his tone. She sat down and pulled out her tablet. A few rows behind, someone else whispered, "Wait, that's the guy who started Liberty?" A ripple began to spread, but none of that changed what had already happened. The cop, the scrutiny, the subtle humiliation, and it wasn't over. At the front of the plane, Officer Brad Kerrigan was stepping in through the front door. He flashed his badge again and had a few quick words with the lead flight attendant. Whatever he said made her blink, then gesture toward Daniel. He was back. Maya sat upright. Brad walked up the aisle slowly, scanning the passengers as if still looking for a reason. He stopped just before Daniel's row, hands on his hips. "Sir," he said, too loud, "can I have a word before we depart?" Danielle looked up. "We're seated and boarded. Is there something urgent?" Brad leaned in. "This won't take long." Maya stood. She didn't say anything, but her presence beside her father was loud enough. Daniel placed a hand on her arm. Lisa Monroe stood too. "Is there a problem, officer?" Brad turned toward her, startled. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." Lisa raised her phone. "I'm a journalist. Everything that happens here is either going to be on or off the record. You decide." Brad hesitated. Passengers were watching again. Someone in row 5 had their phone up, lens pointed discreetly forward. "Is this man under suspicion?" Lisa asked, stepping into the aisle. "Because if he's not, then maybe let him take his seat in peace." Warning. Brad's jaw clenched. "No further action at this time," he said, retreating a step. Daniel watched him, eyes unblinking. Brad turned and left the plane, the pressure of 100 silent stares following him like a spotlight. The cabin stayed quiet as the door sealed shut behind him. I slowly sat back down. Lisa gave Daniel a small nod and returned to her seat. No one said anything for a long minute. Then the intercom crackled back to life. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Daniel leaned back into his seat and closed his eyes, not to rest, but to wait. Something was shifting. He could feel it in the silence. It wasn't the confrontation, it wasn't the slight. It was the moment after, the part that always mattered more than what came before. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, not from discomfort, but from habit, an old soldier's instinct. Always aware, always adjusting. Maya had fallen into a quiet rhythm beside him, hoodie half off now, earbuds finally playing something soft enough he could hear the faint trace of lo-fi beats. She wasn't talking, but she wasn't sulking either. That was progress. Across the aisle, the two businessmen who had earlier whispered about him were now openly debating the merits of private charter versus commercial first class. "I mean, if you really value your time, you go charter," said the man in the tighter blazer, nursing his third drink. "Sure," his companion replied. "Unless you own the airline, then I guess you sit wherever you want." Daniel didn't bite. He let the comment hang in the air like vapor, ignored but not unnoticed. That kind of passive challenge used to rile him when he was younger. Back in the early days of liberty, when people laughed at the idea of a veteran with no formal business degree starting an airline from scratch. Now, he'd learned that power came from silence, as much as it did from speech. A gentle knock came at his armrest. It was Lisa Monroe again. She leaned slightly from behind, her eyes lit with that persistent journalistic fire. "I know this isn't an interview," she said, her voice low, "but I've got to ask. Was that officer harassing you on the ground? That wasn't standard protocol." Daniel turned his head slowly, measured. "Depends what you call standard these days." Lisa exhaled, sitting back in her seat, but not retreating from the moment. "I've covered a lot of travel stories. Startup airlines, flight crew walkouts, even a guy who tried to bring a live turkey on board as an emotional support animal. But I've never seen someone with a boarding pass, cleared through security, get pulled out of line without cause." "I wasn't pulled out," Daniel replied, not unkindly. "I was tested. Happens more than you think." "See you?" He nodded once. Lisa's mouth tightened, but she didn't press further. Instead, she scribbled something into her tablet, then slid a small card across the armrest between them. "When you're ready to talk, really talk, off or on record. I'd like to be the one who tells that story." Daniel took the card, but didn't promise anything. He tucked it into the pocket of his coat and turned back to the window. 10 years ago, that offer would have felt like a lifeline. Now, it felt like a flare. Visible, helpful maybe, but not always necessary. The flight continued in peaceful silence for a while. Cabin crew served drinks. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for the midday sun, slicing through the clouds. The hum of the engines settled into a lull that could almost lull a man to sleep. Then came the voice. It wasn't from the intercom. It came from the back of the first-class cabin. "I don't care if he's a veteran or the Pope. You don't let people like that just walk in and sit next to your kids." It was loud, male, forceful, and it cut the peace like a blade. Ken's eyes opened. Slowly, deliberately. Maya pulled out her earbuds, confused. Did someone just say? He was already unbuckling his seatbelt. He rose from his seat as the commotion grew louder. Half the cabin turned to look. "Row 4!" A man in a red golf shirt stood up, finger jabbing toward the flight attendant, who was trying, and failing, to keep him in his seat. "Not the only one wondering what he's doing up here." "You're telling me a guy like that, silent, no ID visible, just gets ushered into first class?" The flight attendant murmured something, calm and careful, but it only escalated him. Daniel walked forward. He didn't stomp, didn't raise his voice. He simply appeared, quiet and present, next to the man causing the ruckus. "You have a question?" he said plainly. The man turned. He was stocky, maybe late 50s, silvered hair cut in a crew style, belly pressing against his polo. His eyes blinked, thrown off by Daniel's proximity. "You," he said, then gestured broadly. Yeah, you. Everyone's wondering it. How you ended up here. Some people wait years to collect miles for this kind of seat. Daniel tilted his head. And what exactly makes you think I haven't? Because you don't look like it, the man snapped. You look like you came off a base, not a boardroom. The plane fell into a heavy, unnatural silence. Maya rose behind him. Lisa had already turned in her seat, one hand clutching her tablet again, recording. Daniel didn't respond with anger. Instead, he turned slightly, so everyone could hear him. My name is Daniel Rourke. I served 12 years in the Army. I've flown in the back of Chinooks, the belly of C-130S, and sat in cockpits next to pilots, praying we'd make it home in one piece. I started Liberty Skyways 6 years ago. It wasn't built with trust funds or tech IPOs. It was built with persistence, grit, and the last of my VA loan. The man said nothing. Daniel continued, voice even, unshaken. The first aircraft I leased was a decommissioned CRJ-700 with more rust than range. I patched it. I painted it. I flew it myself for the first test run between Denver and Tucson. I've scrubbed lavatories in hangars at 3 a.m., and I've rewritten every SOP we used to train our crew today. I wear a coat now instead of a uniform. But don't mistake silence for status. I don't sit in first class to be seen. I sit here because I've built this seat. A slow breath moved through the cabin. Then someone in row 5 clapped. One clap, awkward at first, and then another. By the third, it had spread. Not a standing ovation, this wasn't theater, but a ripple of acknowledgement, something genuine. Maya stood straighter. The man in the red shirt looked around, suddenly very alone. He tried to speak, but only managed, I didn't mean it that way. Daniel nodded. You meant it exactly that way. But that's okay. You've said what you believe. I just wanted you to hear what the rest of us believe, too. He turned and walked back to his seat. Liesl stared at him as he sat down, her expression unreadable. Then she simply whispered, That was one hell of a statement. He didn't reply. He just reached into his jacket, pulled out the small Airline wings pin that Maya had been asking about since she was 10, and quietly handed it to her. For when you're ready to fly left seat, he said. She held it like it was made of gold. Not because it glittered, but because it came from him. Because it came after everything. The plane cruised on, and while the altitude hadn't changed, everything else had. The cabin had grown quieter since Daniel sat down. Not out of awkwardness, but reverence, a kind of hush that settles in after something real has been said. Passengers returned to their seats, their posture different now, straighter, more attentive. The energy in first class had shifted entirely, as if everyone finally understood they weren't just flying through the air. They were flying on the shoulders of a man who built the wings himself. Daniel leaned his head back, eyes closed, one hand resting lightly on Maya's armrest. He wasn't sleeping. He rarely did in flight. Old habit. Too many hours in Blackhawks with the weight of responsibility humming just beneath the rotor blades. Too many mid-air alerts and quick descents to ever fully let go at 30,000 feet. Maya clutched the wings pin he'd given her, still nestled in her palm like a secret. She didn't look at her phone, didn't play her music. She just stared ahead, her expression unreadable. For once, she didn't feel like the daughter of a man with a mysterious job and strange silences. For once, she felt like she understood. In the rear of the first-class cabin, Lisa Monroe watched him closely. She hadn't typed anything on her tablet in 10 minutes, though her fingers hovered above it, frozen. She was replaying every word Daniel had said, rewriting the story she thought she was going to pitch. The war veteran turned executive wasn't just another profile on resilience. He was an open chapter on power, dignity, and silence as resistance. Her editor had told her once, find the fire, not the smoke. Today, she'd seen both. The flight deck buzzed slightly as the door opened briefly. A co-pilot stepped out, nodding to the crew, stretching slightly before ducking back inside. Routine. Nothing urgent. But Daniel's eyes flicked open. He noticed everything. He'd memorized the gait of men in charge. This one was calm. Good. Another announcement came over the intercom. This time it was the pilot himself. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising smoothly above the Sonoran Desert, about 40 minutes out from Phoenix. Current temperature on the ground is 84 degrees, skies clear. We'll begin our descent shortly. Thank you again for choosing Liberty Skyways. Daniel smiled faintly. He didn't know this pilot personally, but he knew the voice. Strong, even, with that practiced warmth Liberty trained for. He made a mental note to find out who it was and send a commendation. When the war ended, he promised himself that his new mission would be peace measured not in treaties, but in tone. He wanted his airline to feel like a hand reaching out, not pushing down. A vibration pulsed in Maya's backpack at her feet. She pulled it out. Her phone. The lock screen lit up. Uncle Jared calling. Daniel glanced over. Maya raised an eyebrow, silently asking. He nodded once. She answered,
"Hey, Uncle Jay." Daniel could hear the voice on the other end. Deep, familiar, concerned. "Yeah, we're in the air right now. Phoenix, Dad's with me." I pause. "No, I didn't tell him yet. It's okay." As the most, Maya shot him a quick glance, then said into the phone, "I'll call you when we land." She hung up. Daniel waited. "What's going on?" he asked gently. Maya hesitated, then shrugged. "Uncle Jared just wanted to make sure you were okay." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why wouldn't I be?" Maya looked away, out the window, then back to him. "Because people are talking about what happened at the gate." Daniel frowned. "Already?" "Yeah, someone uploaded a clip from the terminal. It's already circulating online. Uncle Jared said it's picked up on VetNet." Daniel exhaled slowly. VetNet, a private forum for veterans, journalists, and military family members. Trusted, but wide-reaping. He hadn't even stepped off the plane, and the moment had already left the ground. Lisa must have overheard because she leaned forward and gently tapped his seat again. "Sorry, I couldn't help but hear." "If that footage is online, you're going to wake up to a storm tomorrow. Probably tonight." Daniel turned slightly. "I didn't post anything." "You didn't have to," she said. "Someone did. A bystander. It's already on Twitter. Well, X now. And Reddit's picking it up fast, especially since your name's on the passenger manifest and, well, you." Daniel said nothing, but his fingers closed slightly over the armrest. Lisa continued, "They're calling it the first-class stand. It's already trending." Maya snorted despite herself. "That sounds like a movie. Or a movement," Lisa added. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't look angry either, just thoughtful. Cautious? "I didn't do anything special," he said finally. Lisa shook her head. "You did the one thing most people don't. You didn't back down, and you didn't lash out. You stood. That's not nothing." From a few rows back, a teenage boy leaned into the aisle, holding up his phone. "Hey," the boy said, awkward but sincere. "I didn't know who you were before today. My brother's stationed at Fort Campbell. He just texted me. He said to tell you thank you for everything." Daniel nodded. "Tell him to stay sharp and get home." The boy smiled wide and ducked back into his seat. Lisa leaned back, watching him again. "Are you sure you've never run for office?" Daniel chuckled, the first real laugh since boarding. "Oh, God, no. I did my time. Politics is another war zone." The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence. Nothing dramatic, just enough to jostle cups and trigger a ripple of hands reaching for armrests. Maya grabbed his forearm instinctively. He didn't move. The seatbelt sign flicked on. "You'll drease in my mind." "Just a brief patch," the intercom reassured. Daniel patted her hand. We've been through worse. The turbulence passed quickly, but it reminded him peace could always be interrupted. Calm was never guaranteed. You had to carry it with you, ready to restore it when it slipped. Another alert buzzed on Maya's phone. She looked at it, then blinked. Yeah. Someone just tagged you in a video. It's from your deployment. Rourke. Daniel's breath caught. He reached for the phone, hesitated, then took it gently from her. The video loaded. Grainy at first, the screen showing a young soldier, him, kneeling beside a broken-down Humvee in the scorching, archaeous sun, tending to a wounded man under fire. The footage had been private. Archived by his unit, never shared publicly. He'd forgotten it even existed. Beneath it, a caption. This man saved 6 lives in Fallujah. Today, he just wanted to fly home. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. Someone had found it. Someone had remembered. He returned the phone to Maya. Looks like the world remembers more than I thought, he said softly. Maya didn't answer. She just rested her head lightly on his shoulder. The final announcement crackled overhead. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Outside, the Phoenix skyline appeared, sharp and sunlit, the desert stretching endlessly behind it, a city rising from dust, a place to land, a place to begin again. The descent started. Daniel looked forward, not just physically, but mentally. Something had changed in the air and not just altitude. He knew what came next wouldn't be about how he stood up on a plane. It would be about how many others would start standing too.
The wheels touched down with a soft thump. Phoenix sprawled out beneath them, sun-soaked streets, endless rooftops, and the distant shimmer of desert heat bending the horizon. The cabin jolted slightly as the plane decelerated, a familiar sensation that always made Daniel's breath catch, just for a second. It wasn't fear, it was memory. Combat landings didn't fade easily. Even now, in a sleek jet he helped design, that first few seconds of earth meeting steel still rang like a tuning fork deep in his chest. The voice of the pilot returned overhead, steady and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Phoenix. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we arrive at the gate and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. On behalf of Liberty Skyways and our entire crew, thank you for flying with us. Daniel exhaled through his nose and unbuckled slowly. Maya sat upright beside him, wings pinned still clutched tightly in her hand. She hadn't said much since he showed her the video from Iraq. She didn't need to. Some moments speak loudest in silence. As passengers stood and gathered their bags, the mood remained unusually subdued, reverent even. A few people stole glances his way. One man gave a brief respectful nod. A woman behind them softly murmured, "Thank you for your service." Daniel offered a slight smile, not to dismiss it, but to keep it from becoming something larger than the moment could hold. They waited until most of the cabin had cleared before standing. Lisa Monroe lingered behind, tapping something out on her tablet. When Daniel finally moved to step into the aisle, she reached out one last time. "I know you didn't ask for this attention, but it's coming whether you want it or not. You have something rare, a story that's real, and a platform that's earned." Dalhoul glanced at her. "I'm not trying to be a story," Lisa shrugged. "You are one anyway." He gave a small, tired laugh. If I ever change my mind, you'll be the first call." They deplaned into the bright tunnel of the jet bridge. Daniel adjusted the strap of his carry-on across his shoulder and kept one hand gently guiding Maya ahead of him. As they emerged into the terminal, the air shifted again. Something was wrong. He felt it before he saw it. 2 security officers in Liberty uniforms stood just beyond the arrival gate, stiff-backed, hands folded in front of them. Nearby, a man in a sharp gray suit with a Liberty badge on his lanyard stood with a tablet tucked under his arm. His posture wasn't hostile, but it wasn't casual either. Daniel squared his shoulders. The suited man stepped forward. "Mr. Rourke." Daniel stopped. "Yes, my name is Devon Laird. I'm with Corporate Affairs. I've been asked to meet you here per request of the board." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A request?" Laird nodded, glancing at Maya, then back. "Would you mind stepping with me? There's a lounge we've set aside." Maya tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "What is this?" He gave her a reassuring look, though inside something coiled. "It's fine, let's see what they want." They walked together through a side corridor, past other gates, eyes following them. The lounge they entered was small, glass-walled, clean-lined. Inside 2 more men waited. One bald, mid-50s, the other in his 40s, hair neatly parted, both wearing expressions of cautious professionalism. Daniel recognized them immediately. Senior members of Liberty's advisory board, investors, people who helped seed the dream when it was still scribbles on a napkin. He didn't say. "Someone want to explain what this is about?" Daniel asked, voice even. The bald man, Gerald Voss, cleared his throat. "Dan, this isn't a disciplinary thing, it's optics." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Optics?" The other man, Peter Hellman, chimed in. "There was an incident. The footage is spreading fast. We've had over 70,000 mentions on social in the last 2 hours. The board is concerned about brand positioning. I was insulted, profiled. Then I responded with words, calmly, professionally. We understand," Gerald said quickly, "but we live in a reactionary age. Headlines don't wait for context. And the fact that you're the founder means every move you make reflects directly on the brand." Daniel stepped closer. "You think I embarrassed the airline?" Peter hesitated. "We're asking you to consider releasing a statement. Something neutral, unemotional, acknowledging the misunderstanding without assigning blame." Daniel stared at them, disbelief slowly burning into his expression. "You want me to apologize for being profiled?" Gerald held up a hand. "Not apologize, just clarify. De-escalate." Daniel stepped back. His laugh this time was bitter, sharp-edged. "I built this airline for veterans, for people who didn't get second chances. I gave you my story, my credibility, my face. And now, when it's inconvenient—" "It's not that," Peter interrupted. "We just have a responsibility to shareholders." Daners's voice rose, not shouting, but with that unmistakable command tone that used to make boots snap to attention. "You have a responsibility to the truth." The room fell quiet. Maya reached for his hand. Daniel turned toward her, softened, then looked back at them. "You want a statement?" he said. "Here's mine. Liberty Skyways was founded on principles, not profits, on courage, not compliance. If you want someone who'll nod, smile, and walk past injustice because it's easier, that's not me. And if that's not the man you want leading this company anymore, say so. But I won't edit the truth to make it palatable for Boardroom." Peter shifted uncomfortably. Gerald cleared his throat again. "Dan, this isn't about removing you. We just hoped you'd help shape the narrative before it shapes us." Daniel looked past them, out the glass wall toward the terminal. Dozens of people moved freely, unaware, unburdened. Just passengers, just lives. He stepped toward the door. "You want narrative?" he said, without turning around. "Watch what happens when people see what leadership looks like, unfiltered." Maya followed him out. The terminal opened up before them again. He didn't walk quickly. He didn't hide. And as he passed the windows, a few people looked up from their phones. Some nudged friends. Someone snapped a picture. A small group of Liberty employees by the food court paused mid-conversation, eyes widening in recognition. One even clapped. Just once. Quietly. Daniel didn't acknowledge it. He didn't have to. He walked toward the escalator with Maya by his side, his posture straight, his face composed. But inside, he was already planning what came next. There were some statements no press release could match, the kind made not with words, but with unshakable presence. The Arizona sun cast long gold streaks through the airport terminal's windows, framing Daniel and Maya as they stepped off the escalator. Their shadows moved ahead of them, tall, certain, unbothered by the murmurs still rippling behind them. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his shirt. It had come loose at the wrist. He tightened it calmly without breaking stride. His mind wasn't on the boardroom meeting anymore. He'd said his piece, and that was enough. Maya, walking beside him, looked up. "You okay?" Daniel gave her a look that was more answer than smile. Not quite peace, not quite fire. Just that rare stillness that comes when a man knows he didn't bend. "I'm good." As they reached the airport's lobby, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Then it buzzed once more. He checked the screen. 4 missed calls. 2 from Jared. 1 from Colonel Fulton. 1 from an unknown number. Maya glanced at it. "You sure you don't want to take those?" "I'll call them back," he said, slipping the phone into his jacket. But before they could take another step, a voice called out across the lobby. "The most delicate title, Mr. Rourke." Danielle turned. A woman in a Liberty blazer jogged toward him, tablet in hand, flushed but smiling. "We need you upstairs, right now. They've called an emergency press conference." Daniel frowned. "What?" She nodded, catching her breath. "It's everyone. The CEO, the media, veterans groups, even airline unions. They're asking for you." Daniel's jaw tensed slightly. "Who approved this?" The woman stepped back slightly, as if weighing how much to say. "The board didn't call it. The staff did." Daniel blinked. "The staff?" She nodded. "It started in Denver, then Houston, Atlanta, Oakland, everywhere. The moment that clip went viral, crew members started posting their own videos. About who you are, about what liberty meant to them. It spread like wildfire." Maya raised her eyebrows. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," the woman said, smiling wider now, "Liberty's rank and file just made your story theirs, and they want you at the mic." 10 minutes later, Daniel stood in front of a Liberty Skyways step and repeat banner, flanked by dozens of airline employees in uniform, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, reservation agents, even a few janitors from the maintenance wing. The media had shown up fast. Cameras, boom mics, lights. Daniel looked at them, eyes steady. Beside him stood Colonel Rick Fulton, retired, now director of a major veterans outreach foundation. They hadn't seen each other in person since Iraq. "You still walk like you're carrying 30 pounds of gear," Fulton said, shaking his hand with a laugh. Daniel chuckled. "And you still talk like we're in the T." Fulton gestured toward the cameras. "They're not here for Liberty the airline. They're here for Liberty the idea. Don't let them leave without seeing the difference." A staffer stepped up and handed Daniel a microphone. He looked out at the crowd, then slowly down to Maya, who stood just behind the rope line, watching him with an expression he'd never forget. He raised the mic. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "I didn't ask for today. I didn't plan to speak. But when you build something from nothing, it never really belongs to just you." The room held its breath. Liberty Skyways wasn't just a business idea. It was a belief that veterans could come home and still lead, that people from all walks of life could fly with dignity, that no matter your name, background, or rank, you'd be treated like you mattered. Because you do. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in. Yesterday, someone looked at me and didn't see a CEO, didn't see a soldier. They saw a threat, or worse, a mistake. And when I spoke up, the world listened, not because I shouted, but because silence would have been an act of surrender, and we don't surrender. A few Liberty employees applauded, then more. Daniel continued, "We've all seen moments where someone gets singled out, on a train, in a store, at a gate. Maybe you said something, maybe you froze, but I promise you, every single moment you speak truth with composure, you move the needle, even when it's quiet. He looked toward the back, where more employees were crowding in, some holding phones, others just watching with full hearts. This airline doesn't fly because of one man. It flies because of the ground crew in the heat, the flight attendants who carry more emotional labor than most will ever know, the pilots who shoulder lives behind every takeoff, and it flies because of you, the ones who refuse to let service end just because the war did. A swell of applause rolled through the room. Daniel nodded once and lowered the mic. The moment didn't end with cheering. It ended with understanding. Colonel Fulton stepped in beside him. They're not letting you walk away from this. You know that, right? Daniel smiled. I wasn't planning to. Back near the rope line, Maya pushed through and stood beside him. He turned. I want to go to the academy, she said. I blinked. Air Force? She nodded. You built something for people like you. I want to build something for people like me. His throat tightened. You already are, he said. That night, back in their Phoenix hotel suite, Daniel finally turned his phone back on. Hundreds of messages, emails, texts, voicemails. But one stood out. A message from Liberty's board chair. We've never been more proud to be wrong. The company is yours to lead, fully. Name your role. Your vision is the future of this brand. Daniel set the phone down, stepped out onto the balcony, and looked at the sky. Planes blinked across the stars, carving invisible lines through the night. Some carried soldiers, some carried strangers. Some carried people who had no idea their seat had been shaped by a man who once thought he'd never make it back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, a patch, worn but intact. Rourke, 75th Infantry. He didn't need to wear it anymore. But some things you never take off. He looked back toward the room. Maya was curled on the couch, the wings pin in her hand. Tomorrow she would fly back with him. Next month she would tour the academy. And one day he hoped she'd have a seat in that cockpit, not just steering a plane, but carrying forward what Liberty had become. Respect, service, redemption, flight. Daniel Rourke closed his eyes and smiled, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for the man who once walked through a storm, never knowing if there would be light on the other side. There was, and now he was showing others how to find it.